Welcome to today's lesson on the government of Athens, where we're going to look at the people and their roles and the laws that made Athens function. Our objective is to understand the roles and responsibilities of the citizens of Athens, but also we want to be able to compare ancient and modern democracy. How are we like Athenians? How are we different? So key terms: democracy, aristocrats, oligarchy, citizens, tyrant, and Pericles. These are all words that are going to come up in this presentation, and I need you to be mindful of them. So firstly, aristocrats rule. Aristocrats are very wealthy people, families with more money than everyone else. And originally there were kings ruling each of the city-states, so Athens had a king. But then the people who owned the land and had lots of money, aristocrats, so very wealthy people, came together and they took control. And they made the laws and became the government. And then that's when Draco came. Draco was an aristocrat, and he made a lot of tough laws. So if you loitered, so it's kind of like hanging around the school after hours, that was punishable by death. So the term draconian came up. And so people really didn't like these aristocrats and Draco. He was popular with aristocrats, but not with regular people. So a change came. So this was a government which only a few people had power. It's called an oligarchy. Oligarchy is when aristocrats, a small little group, are in control of everything. So with the aristocrats, we had more strict laws by a man named Solon who tried to fix everything, and he made everyone a citizen, or someone who had the right to participate in government. However, Athens was still an already However, Athenians were still ready to get rid of these aristocrats, to start fresh. So, like I said before, today when a law seems too strict, we call it draconian, after the lawmaker Draco. So, here's your first shout out. What is an oligarchy? Pause and think for a moment. If you said when a government is run by small rich families called aristocrats, you'd be correct. And by today's standards, these people would be very rich, the richest of people, because owning land at this time made you like a millionaire. Then came tyrants. So the oligarchy was overthrown by a tyrant. And a tyrant meant a person who holds power through force. But in ancient Greece, tyrants were a good thing. We call a leader a tyrant today, it's bad. But tyrants were people who had the power during a crisis or a time of change to take control, bring people together, and make things better. So a tyrant wasn't a bad thing. And Athens has a long history of people becoming tyrants and making changes. And so tyranny is a government in which a tyrant has power. And today, tyrant is usually describes a negative, harsh ruler, like Saddam Hussein would have been considered a tyrant. So what is a tyrant? This is your second shout out. Pause the video and think for a moment. If you said tyrants were people elected, they were given complete authority during a crisis, like war and riots, that would be correct. You could also say a tyrant was a person who took power through force and ruled independently. Now, Athens makes their democracy. However, the aristocrats came into power again after Pisistratus, the man who kind of got things going, died. And this remained this way until Cleisthenes took power. Cleisthenes was a member of a rich family, and he had different plans for Athens. Under Cleisthenes, under his rule, the first democracy was created. So he called upon the people to help overthrow the government once and for all. So he changed everything. We're going to get rid of that small little group of rich people who run the government. So here's how it would happen. All citizens had the right to assemble and participate in making laws. That's our first thing. Citizens could give speeches and debate issues, and after speeches were over, voting took place. So if you were a citizen, you were able to come to the Athenian government or assembly. You could speak on any issue. You could argue with anyone that was there, and you had a vote. However, women slaves, and foreigners weren't considered citizens, therefore they could not vote. Also, men who couldn't own land or didn't have a certain amount of money couldn't vote either. So voting was usually done by a show of hands. For a majority of decisions, 6,000 citizens were needed to be there to vote. And as you can imagine, it's difficult at times to find 6,000 people to come and vote. So to make it easier, people were selected to serve on a smaller council which decided the laws. So 6,000 citizens would be like all the people of Beausejour had to get together to make a decision. And that's messy. And that's hard to do. So a small group or a town council or a city council came together, and that was they made the laws, and then big votes happened when all the citizens came together. And debates on the pinks were often very noisy and lacked organization. So a lot of people were talking, like Farmer Joe was yelling about the price of goats, and other people were arguing about wars, and lots of stuff was going on. It was really big and difficult. So voting took place on a small hill, and it held up to 6,000 people. The changes happened again. Citizens began to gain power by serving on juries and deciding court cases, and democracy was doing pretty good. Then a guy like Pericles felt that participating in the government was important. And he was also defending Athens during a war, so he wanted more people involved. So Pericles encouraged other parts of Greece to be democratic. And he wanted every paid, and even paid citizens to serve in the government. So before it used to be rich people who had the money to try to run for office and do positions. Pericles paid people to run and hold office so poor people could get involved. Then democracy ended. When Athens was conquered by Macedonia in the north, the Macedonian king ruled like a dictator and he became the king. The assembly still met, but didn't do anything to upset the king in making the citizens, and it made it so that it's very hard for the citizens to say anything really again. And eventually, Athenian democracy was lost forever. And nobody could make decisions without offending this Macedonian king down here. So now let's think about this. What are the differences between Greece and Canada? Well, ancient Greece was what was called a direct democracy. Canada is a representative democracy. They're two different things. So in a direct democracy, everyone represents themselves. So everyone in Canada would have to show up. And that's really difficult. So in our representative democracy, we elect officials to represent us. So in this case, we have a member of parliament and a member of legislation. We pick them, they speak for issues. Citizens would always gather in a direct democracy and discuss issues. In a representative democracy, elected officials meet to make laws and enforce them. And the population of Greece was large, but still small enough to have a government in place to allow citizens to debate and vote. For example, in the United States, they have senators and congressmen who vote for us. And this is the same in Canada, where we have senators and we also have members of parliament. We're just too big. We have to vote people who represent our best interests and will talk for us. Now your homework. How is a direct democracy different from a representative democracy? You may have to rewind your video, and think back, but that'll give you a sense of how are we different from the Greeks? And also, was Greece a true democracy? And that concludes our homework.